Okay, so I'm calling this video Total Unload. Spirituality, your mind, my mind, gender equality, and thought levels. And so I plan to do a total unload of some of the key things that I think about, which most people just don't like to think about. But anyone who knows me knows that I am a deep thinker. Doesn't mean that I know everything. I just think about everything. Uh, so this is probably going to be a long video. I'm going to make it as short as I possibly can, move as quickly as I possibly can. But some of the first stuff that I have written out here in note form uh, might not be all that interesting. Then again, who knows? It might actually piss you off. Um, but some of the stuff that I'll get to later on has to do with, well, let me say, Psalm 82:6, which says, I have said, ye are gods, ye are sons of the Most High. Some versions like to say, uh, your children of the Most High, so as to include women. But I will say this, that while I personally do support gender equality, I'm not going to change what the Bible says God said, okay? So, I mean, even Paul would say things like, I, not the Lord, say this. The Lord, not I, says that. But the Lord he was talking about was Jesus, not God. But anyway, I do like to be accurate, and I'm not going to alter God's word. But anyway, so for those of you who might not be so religious, um, I do also plan to say some things about society's destruction and how that connects to the mind and not just the dumbing down of America. There's that, but that's not the only thing contributing to the destruction of society. Some very smart people are part of that destruction. Um, Let me see. Also, there's God's evil. Isaiah 45:7. I form light and create darkness. I make good and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. And I personally actually believe that God has used the United States government to do a considerable amount of evil in the world. He is a God of necessary evils, and he has carried out some of those evils through the U.S. government. I'm not saying that God said it. I'm just saying that I've concluded that. Okay, so I, not God, am saying that, and I hope that I'm right. Because when Job's friends were wrong, God was not kind to them. He didn't kill him, but he didn't speak very kindly. And I also plan to say some stuff about major uh, changes, not specific economic changes, but the change in, shall we say, the ethos of the United States, the zeitgeist, or I don't know, maybe neither word is correct, but I'll get to that sooner or later. And one of the things that I think is going to happen is that the federal government is going to become very noticeably ineffectual, and we're going to lose our geopolitical influence, and Afghanistan might be the first of a number of countries to push us out. And I think that even on the home front, the we're going to have more and more governors asserting state sovereignty and pulling away from obeying the federal government. But anyway, those are some of the things that I'm thinking about these days. So, but let me get to the stuff that might piss you off. So, this first item might not. I would imagine it wouldn't. Um, so there's a lot of public conversation about mental illness. You know, you got Simone Biles, a gymnast. You got Naomi Osaka. I think she's a tennis player, right? I mean, I don't really watch sports, but and they're coming out talking very publicly about their mental struggles. Then you got Nicholas Cruz, the guy who killed 17 people at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School uh, in Broward County, Florida, Fort Lauderdale. And you got these other mass shooters, and they always want to claim mental illness and get leniency because of it, even when they kill so many people, you know. And so there's the public conversation around mental illness on that front. Um, then I also remember a few years back now, actually probably closer to 10 years, reading that social media was really good for people experiencing mental illness because they could say things on social media that they weren't bold enough, brave enough to say in person. You know, like the old expression, the further you walk, the braver you get. Uh, and so, you know, when somebody is talking about fighting you, they're walking away and talking about how they're going to whoop you. You know, you just tell them the further you walk, the braver you get. You know, and see if they come back at you. But anyway, then more recently, there's this talk about Instagram and Facebook being detrimental to people's mental health, especially teenage girls with body image issues, you know, and I personally think that parents should just do a better job teaching these girls to be comfortable in their own skin. And, you know, I know that boys form differently than girls, obviously. I know that, but boys don't seem to be going through those body image issues like girls, and kind of leaves you to wonder, you know, what that says about the male mindset versus the female mindset. But I won't go all the way there just yet. Um, but my next item that I have written down is that the public conversation on mental illness in some ways mirrors women's advice to men in the late 70s and early 80s. I was born 1969, and I remember things from when I was 3 years old. Uh, but by the time I was 8 or 9, 77, 78, you know, I was very well aware of what was going on in my immediate surroundings and the sorts of things that I heard repeatedly, you know, and so let me see. I do recall maybe just shy of my 10th birthday, 8, 9 years old, hearing this idea that women think men should express feelings and emotions, that we don't do that or we don't do it enough. I wasn't quite a man at the time. Um, and this idea that we should be sensitive. And so you might ask, well, how does that mirror conversation around mental illness? Well, the mentally ill people oftentimes have difficulty expressing themselves. Um, that doesn't say anything for sensitivity, but there's a much stronger parallel here, which is that uh, women were advising men to make yourself vulnerable, and I'm reminded of some lengthy conversations between my mother and myself, uh, where she actually brought up that idea in other sensitive emotional types of ideas. But anyway, this idea of making yourself vulnerable, just kind of putting yourself out there, saying, hey, I'm dealing with such and such a mental issue, and just kind of making my case public, like Simone Biles or Naomi Osaka, and I think there have actually been a few other big names, and some have actually been guys, but those are just the two that come to mind for me that I've heard the most uh, in relation to this issue. So there's just all this talk about vulnerability and mental illness and wanting sympathy because of it, and so forth and so on. Well, I remember probably around 2005 seeing a little bit of Dr. Phil. I actually am not fond of him at all, but um, I have passed through the room when other people were watching him and seen little bits and pieces of what he had to say. And I do recall that right around 2005, maybe even 2004, because I know where I was living at the time, um, that he made this statement that there are so many books about what not to think, but few, if any, books about what to think. So there's all this talk about mental illness, but then you don't actually hear anybody talking about mental wellness. Now, if I go to a cardiologist and he says, such and such is wrong with your heart, and I say, well, you don't seem to know how to tell me how a good heart functions, he'd probably say, Mr. Sheptock, yes, I do. A good heart has 4 valves and it works in such and such a way. And the same would be true about lungs or gastrointestinal matters. The doctors who work on those sorts of issues can tell you how those different body parts work when they're healthy. Okay, they don't just try to deal with an illness. They can actually tell you about how different body parts work when they are healthy. But that's not true when it comes to the mind. We only deal with it, when we figure that there's something wrong with the person's mind. But if you don't have an idea of what a right mind is like, then how do you know something is wrong? That's the big question I'm dancing around here. That if you don't know what defines a right mind, then how the heck can you know when something is wrong? Uh, so there's that. So well, when it comes to how to think, what to think, um, I see a lot of Facebook posts these days uh, addressing the way people think, addressing the stupid types of things that they say or do. Uh, and there's one particular man, not a Facebook friend, but a public figure of some sort. I think he might be in the financial field, but he just has a lot of quotes out there that people deem to be wise, and so there are a lot of memes with his picture and his words. And his name is Tom Sowell or Sowell. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. I'll go with Sowell. But anyway, I remember one particular post that had a quote from Tom Sowell where it says that the problem is not that Johnny can't read. The problem is not even that Johnny can't think. The problem is that Johnny confuses thinking with feeling. And so there's that quote and a number of other quotes concerning how people think that have been coming across my Facebook a lot recently. I guess it's because the algorithms have figured out, that I have a lot to say about how people think. But anyway, let me see. So, I do tend to focus on talking about grim realities. And in short, here's what happened. So, like I say, I was born in 1969. I'm 52. So, 95, I was 26. But anyway, in my late 20s, I came to realize that a lot of people will get into a serious conversation, and I guess they figure that they're going to outreason you, and then as the conversation progresses, uh, you present logic that kind of backs them into a corner, and they end up having to admit to this or that grim reality, something that they just didn't want to admit to, some conclusion that they just didn't want to arrive at, but they presented the weaker logic, and they at least had a sense of logic so as to realize that you were out logicking them, and so then they finally get to this point where their ability to logic just kind of dissipates, and the conversation just kind of falls apart. You know, you were like 2 or 3 steps away from convincing them of your point of view, and then all of a sudden, this person who knew how to logic with you for 15 or 20 minutes, maybe longer, all of a sudden, they can't put two and two together and get four, because they realize that if they continue to admit to this or that logical statement of yours, that they would have to admit to a conclusion that they don't want to believe. And so maybe they're pretending, but they're acting as though they all of a sudden can't make heads or tails of the arguments that you're raising, you know, and that ability to reason that was so apparent early on in the conversation is just no longer there. You know, as soon as you get close to some grim reality that they don't want to believe. And it might not be grim to you, but it's grim to them. And so now they can't reason at all. You know, and so I've always thought that was crazy. And that just kind of alerted me to how horribly some people think. And that was about half my life ago. And so for this latter half of my life thus far, I've just been perturbed by that particular behavior in people. So let me see. Then I should say that by age 10, I had already been taught by my elementary school teachers that you had to accept the best logic you've heard on a matter, unless and until you come up with some stronger logic that points in a different direction. But apparently, that idea has not been taught to everyone, or even the majority of people for that matter, in America anyway, in the U.S. And so them not having that basic thought rule makes reasoning with them very difficult. Um, I was also taught at an early age that the truth can hurt, you know, and so I guess, you know, I learned to grapple with that fact early on, whereas some people make it into their 20s, 30s, even 40s, having not wrapped their head around the fact that the truth can hurt. And so as you get close to a truth that they don't want to admit to, they just get emotional with you, you know, and they confuse thinking with feeling. And let me see. So, and I know that somewhere between the age of 10 and 16, probably right around the age of 11 or 12, that I became keenly aware of the fact that once your life takes a certain path, you can't prove what would have been. Once A happens, you can't prove what would have been if B happened, you know, and so, you know, you stop crying over spilled milk. You know, what happened happened. You move forward in some way. That was a common expression when I was a kid. Don't cry over spilled milk. You know, I also come from the sticks and stones generation where you didn't get emotional. Well, I would say if you, as a kid who was called a name by another kid, you went to an adult, said, Johnny called me a name. That adult, be it a teacher or your parent, or a parent, I should say, because you have two, but they would tell you, sticks and stones can break my bones, but names will never hurt me. Call me this and call me that, and call yourself a big fat rat. Go tell them that little poem and be through with it. That's how we dealt with that back then. You know, we had tougher minds back then. So I also went to Christian school for 4.5 years. The last half of eighth grade and all of high school, two different Christian schools. When I was in the 10th grade, my family moved to Florida, and I finished at a Christian school in Florida. But the Christian school in New Jersey was actually much better. Um, and there are things that a certain teacher there taught me that I still think about to this day. One of those things that Brother Steve taught me was, he taught the whole class, of course, was that when you read the Bible, you should you should remember this: that an authority will sometimes tell you to do what you don't want to do, and sometimes stop you from doing what you want to do. That's just part of being authority. And when you read God's word, you should be looking to see what He's telling you to do that you don't want to do, what He's telling you not to do that you want to do. If all you're doing is reading the Bible for validation for what you already do, you're reading it in the wrong mindset, the wrong spirit. Okay, so you should be looking for what hurts you, looking for what bothers you, and that's what you should be working on obeying. Um, and so there's that. Um, I already covered differentiating between knowledge and feeling, and you know our society needs to focus on being logical, being rational, thinking forward as much as possible. Um, so when I was in Christian school, we had a class that well, it was a Bible learning class, but it had overtones of rhetoric, debating, and so we were taught when we did our reports or when we had our discussions in class to put yourself on both sides of an issue. Don't just know what you have to say, but know what sorts of arguments someone on the other side of the issue might raise, and be prepared for that and know what your comeback is going to be. When the other party says this, no, I'm going to say A, the other party's going to say B, and then I'm going to say C in response to their B. And know how you're going to go back at them when they raise the arguments that you were able to predict that they would make. Okay, so but I've run into people in my adulthood, even people who were older than me, people who, when I was in my 40s, they were in their late 50s, early 60s, and they actually get upset when you raise this idea of them putting themselves on both sides of the issue. I remember a particular advocacy meeting. I was the chairman of the group that was meeting, and we were talking about going down to City Hall to advocate for a certain issue. I don't even remember what the issue was, but I do remember that. Oh, well, so it did involve the budget to a certain degree. It was an idea that would require money, and so I said, well, we need to look at parts of the budget because it is a public document, parts of the city budget that have been underspent year after year, and figure out where we're going to get the money from in order to fund this idea that we're going to bring to the council, to the council member who has oversight of human services. He's now deceased, by the way. and a new council member has oversight of human services, of course. But I said we should figure out where that money's going to come from. And the response that I got from multiple people was, "No, Eric, don't you do that. That's their job." And I said, "Well, when we go down there and we raise his idea, raise his concern, then the councilman is going to say, well, where am I going to get the money from to do this? And since we know that, we should be ready and we should have an answer." And the response I got from the group was, "No, don't you say that for them. You let the council person say that." And so they did not want to think ahead. They did not want to be rational. They did not want to put themselves on both sides of the issue. They did not want to think. So, let me see. So the next thing I have is there's an overemphasis in our society on emotion. And with me having been born in '69, and with me having really become aware of these types of issues by the age of 8 or 9, late '70s, that late '70s puts us just a few years after Roe v. Wade, after abortion was legalized. And so it may be just mere coincidence that I notice certain ideas being tossed around, and that those ideas, I noticed those ideas right